There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Hello BookTube, I'm Shawn the Book Maniac. Welcome back to my channel and welcome to one of my brand new bookshelves. Finally, the big reveal, although it's been in the backdrop of some of my bite-sized book chats interviews. But anyway, this is my second attempt to make a special kind of book haul video. It's more than a book haul video, it's not quite a book haul video, but here is the story. I got so far behind on editing and publishing book haul videos because during the early, I guess the first year of the, I can't remember how long it was, maybe the first 6 months, the first full year of COVID, when I was in Tokyo, I was working at home pretty much exclusively. So I had all this extra spending money that I wasn't spending on transportation and restaurants and this and that I spent on books weekly. So I acquired a massive amount of books and filmed book hauls, and it took months before I'd get around to editing that one. So I was about 6 months behind. I think the last book haul video that I posted on my channel, and it was about a month ago, maybe 6 weeks ago, I filmed in January 2022. So I had maybe 4 or 5 other unedited book hauls from Tokyo, and I have decided I'm not going to edit them, I'm not going to post them. Half of those books are still coming to me by slow boat in the mail from Tokyo. I don't have them. I don't want to be so far behind. There is no best before date for book hauls. I realize that, but I'm also aware that some of my subscribers feel weird when they see videos of me in Tokyo. But the main reason is I just like to catch up and start fresh. I got a huge, this other shelf over here is, most of it is my book haul since I arrived in Saskatoon, May 28th. So let's do this video first. This is my starter library. These are the books I brought in my suitcases from Tokyo because I thought I might get to them sooner rather than later, and I couldn't bear to be without them. And very few of them have I actually read since then, but that was the rationale. So this is my starter library from Tokyo, and there might be 1 or 2 of them that I've already hauled and you've seen the video, but I don't think so, or most of them not. And I'm not gonna do a book haul on all the other books. I'm gonna delete those old videos and start fresh with Saskatoon book hauls. Does that make sense? The reason I'm doing this, I'm filming this for a second time, is it was over an hour the last time. I've already been talking for almost 3 minutes, so I am going to just show you most of these books very briefly, 30 seconds a book, and then 5 or 6, I'm gonna sit down, probably go in the other room, pour myself a beer and tell you in more detail about only 5 or 6. So that's gonna be quite a process choosing which ones I wanna talk to you about. So without further ado, here are the books that I brought. This is a novel by the Canadian novelist Marian Engel. She wrote The Bear. I am just finishing up editing a chat that Dorian and James and I, we chatted about The Bear in a big Zoom chat last year, and we are going to be, and the video about the next novel that we read, The Honeyman Festival, will be published just a few days, maybe a few weeks before you see this video. This is another one. This is a fairly new, buzzy book from Brazil. Phenotypes by Paulo Scott, translated from the Portuguese by Daniel Hahn. I did a bite-sized book chats, which I'll link in the show notes, with Ron Restrepo. I had already bought the book by then. Looking forward to reading it. It was nominated for the Man Booker Prize this year, I think. This is the latest novel to be published by the recently, like last year, Nobel Prize for Literature laureate, Abdulrazak Gurnah, Afterlives. I read the first chapter of this to Lindy during our concussion reading project, and we both really liked the opening chapter. The Korean-American novelist Jung Yun's second novel, Oh Beautiful. It's gotten somewhat mixed reviews. I loved her debut, Shelter, and I have a bite-sized chat about this with Chris from The Book Cougars. I'll link to that. Here is one that's definitely going in the pile of books I want to talk about at some length. Khwabnama by Akhteruzzaman Elias, translated by Arunava Sinha. And this is one of the most popular works of Bangladeshi literature. I can't remember how I found out about it, so we're going to hear more about this later. Chemmeen, this is a novel from India. Chemmeen by Thakazhi Sivasankara Pillai. This was translated by Anita Nair. I had a bite-sized book chat with a really smart woman from India. Her name has just completely gone into my head at this moment that made me order this book. And this is in the gorgeous Seagull Books edition. This is the first in a, what is it, a pentology? Yes, a pentology from Estonia. This is volume 1, and it is 550 pages. It's a farming novel, or at least that's how the series begins. So Vargamäe, and the author is A.H. Tammsaare, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Translated by Ina Feldbach and Alan Peter Trei. I read the first chapter of this to Lindy and we both loved it. I'll have more to say about this. This is what I'm putting aside to talk about in depth a little later in this broadcast. A work of Indigenous history that's in what was colonized to be Saskatchewan. Almighty Voice, Resistance and Reconciliation by Bill Waiser. I'm going to talk about this one too. And now that I live here, it feels all the more urgent that I read it. This one is on everybody's lips these days because it's on the Booker's long list, Glory by NoViolet Bulawayo. I waited with bated breath for her next novel to come out, and then when it came out I found out it's a Zimbabwean animal farm. I'm not sure I'm ever going to read it. Despite Eric Carl Anderson and I think Scott of Gunpowder Fiction and Plot both loved it. I think Scott did too. I don't know. Another Seagull Books book, Sherko Fateh's The Dark Ship. Translated from the German by Martin Chalmers. The protagonist at the beginning of the story anyway is a Kurdish boy in Iraq, Saddam Hussein's Iraq. And the opening chapter that I read to Lindy was just riveting. So, curious to continue on with this now after having read the first chapter. Everybody and their dog read this last year. Not me. I really want to get to it. On Settled Ground by Claire Fuller. It would be my second novel by her. So far I have only read Swimming Lessons. And quite enjoyed that. I Love Cantores by Carolina Durabortis, the lesbian Uruguayan American novelist. And this is her second novel, The President and the Frog. And this is more political, but I'm okay with that. I hope it's good. I hope there's some lesbianism in it. I'd be surprised if there wasn't, but I haven't heard too much about it since it came out. This is an Indigenous novel that happened in the colonial entity known as America, Even As We Breathe by Annette Sanuk Clapsaddle. And I read the first chapter of this to Lindy and we both loved it. Queer Latino short stories, Gordo by Jaime Cortez. Lindy loved this. After I read her the first story, she got the book and finished it herself. Daryl by Jackie Ess, a trans-American writer. The plot, I think it goes in a trans direction near the end, but it starts out with a man who has a cuckolding fetish, and that has to be the least appealing premise for a novel that I can think of. Scott and Nell both worshipped it, so I have to try it. It's very small. Not going to say anything about this. Everybody's heard of it. After Parties, the gay Cambodian-American author Anthony Vesna So, who took his own life just before this book was published, tragically. I've mentioned this in a video that probably a lot of you didn't see. This is a novel in verse, which I don't think I really understood when I ordered it, but otherwise the premise is fascinating. It's called On the Line by Joseph Pontus, translated by Stephanie Smee. And it's got a subtitle, Notes from a Factory, and the factory is a fish factory. It's, I think, autofiction because the protagonist is the author's name, and he is unable to find work in this field, and he ends up working for a fish factory, and this is a novel about the experience, and it's in verse. The in-verse part I'm not crazy about, but the rest of it sounds kind of interesting. This is a gay novel that I read in the 90s after it was published, Now and Then by William Corlett, and I loved it at the time. Started to pine for it when I was in Tokyo. Bought myself a used copy, didn't reread it. Here it is, and now I have my original copy on the other shelf that was stored at the farm. I got 2 copies of this. This one intrigues me, not just the cover. The Stromness Dinner by Peter Benson. And I'm going to talk about this a little bit. It's going to go on the pile for a longer chat. You have maybe seen this in a book haul video, because I remember I got more comments on this book than any other book that's kind of obscure in any of my book hauls, which made it more interesting to me. The Handsome Monk and Other Stories by Sering Dundrop, translated by Christopher Peacock. And Tibet is a place that is terrorized and colonized by China, the most evil country in the world after Russia. This would be a nice way into getting acquainted with the literature of that forsaken place, that brutally colonized place. I didn't get to this for Pride Month this year. A queer trans writer from Montreal, Helen Chow Bradley, personal attention role play. It sounded really unique. Same for this, I'm not going to talk about this. If you want more information, I did talk about it in my Pride TBR video this year. Didn't get to it. Doubting Thomas by Matthew Clark Davison. It's about a gay man falsely accused of child molestation at the school where he's a teacher. The lovely Marilyn Maya Mendoza did a bite-sized chat with me about this one, and I promptly bought it. Mrs. Lorimer's Quiet Summer by Molly Clavering. If I believed in seasonal reading, if I didn't eschew seasonal reading like the plague, I would read this before summer's over. Maybe this will be the last book I set aside. Marjorie Grant's Latchkey Ladies. Stay tuned. Oh, this is embarrassing. I thought I had written down a cheat sheet about how to pronounce this Irish author's name, and I can't find it. I will do a vocal paste in because I know that I have this somewhere. So I'll just hold it up here. Here is the pronunciation. Eilish Nagivna, which I will add in later. And it's called The Shelter of Neighbors. I read one of these stories to Lindy and we were both quite taken with it. I want to continue. This is a work of kind of natural history and ecology about Saskatchewan, the grasslands. River in a Dry Land, A Prairie Passage by Trevor Harriott. It's a classic. My mum loved it, which is what made me buy a very affordable hardcover copy of this out-of-print book. Have it shipped all the way to Tokyo. Didn't read it. Now I've got it back home and I hope to get to it. One of the most popular works of literary fiction from Ukraine in the last few years, Andrei Kirkov's Grey Bees. Translated from the Russian by Boris Drolyak. Reading one of these short stories from this Tara June Winch collection. She's the author of my favorite book from last year. The only book I've read twice in 1 year, The Yield. This is an earlier collection of short fiction, After the Carnage. And on the basis of one story from this, I can say that Tara June Winch is one of my very most favorite writers because it was an excellent short story. And I loved the Yield so much I read it twice in 1 year. Want to read the rest of these stories. I have a bite-sized book chat about this, but I already had the book. I read the first story, title story to Lindy. What a intellectually challenging and deeply riveting story. Swimmer Among the Stars by Kanish Taror. And I won't say any more about it, but boy, I think it's the only work of fiction he's published. I may be wrong about that, but this is something special. I'll just quickly show these. These are the books by Anukuri Upadhyay. She was just on my bite-sized book chats on my 52nd episode. This was the first book I finished reading in 2022. I absolutely loved it. I have these two to read. Can't wait. This is a collection of stories from the UK. This Paradise by Ruby Cowling. Read one to Lindy. We both loved it. This is from Boiler House Press. One of Anne Enright's most popular novels. Didn't this win something, or the Booker or something? I'm not sure. Or the Women's Prize. The Gathering. I've talked about this in way too many videos, but this is a translated novel from the German about a bunch of German businessmen that go to a retreat in Scotland, and there's something strange and hilarious that happens with a peacock on the grounds. It sounds like it could be madcap, but I'm curious. I actually attended the book launch thing on Zoom. Attend is not the right verb there, but you know what I mean. I still haven't read Miriam Tave's Fight Night. Want to? I was mesmerized by the opening 10 pages of this novella by Wolfgang Hilbig, Old Rendering Plant, translated from the German by Isabel Fargo Cole. Want to read more? There isn't a whole lot more to it. And finally, a novel set in modern-day Senegal by an African-American writer who lived in Senegal. No Heaven for Good Boys. All right, so now let me sit down, pour myself a beer, and I'll tell you a little bit more about those select few. Well, I feel like this is the bar in the bookcase, but tonight's beer is Czech Var, original Czech lager that I got at the local liquor store a couple days ago, and I didn't have a bottle opener in the house, so I had to go to the dollar store to buy one, and here we are with my lovely double-size beer mug that came in the boxes from Japan on Friday, last week. And I had to turn the air conditioner off in the living room so that you could hear me talk. So that should make me be speedy, because it's a hot day. All right, so not at great length, but a little bit more length. Khwabnama, it's actually all one word, and it's never shown as one word in any of the title pages or anything, but it is one word. This translation is 2021, and I don't have any information about when it was published. But it's set in Bengal in the 1940s, about the famine and the revolt of the sharecroppers. I'm just going to read you what I read on the book haul that you never saw. It was the basis of reading the first page of this novel on the book haul that you never saw that made me find space in my suitcase for it, because it's one of the most riveting openings I've read in a long time. The spot where Tamiza's father stood with his feet planted in the mud, craning his neck as high as possible, stretching his nerves taut, and waving his jet-black arms to dispel the gray clouds, needs to be noted carefully. A long time ago, when, leave alone Tamiza's father, even his father had not been born, when his, this is not the audio narrator stumbling, this is the text. When his grandfather, Bagar Maji's birth, was still a long way in the future, when Bagar Maji's grandfather's father, or was it his grandfather, had barely been born, or not, and even if he had, was only crawling about on the newly laid earth in the home built by clearing a part of the forest, on one afternoon during those days, while he was speeding towards the Kartoa River to visit the Mahastan Killa with several of Majnu Shah's fakirs, Munshi Barkatullah Shah was flung from his horse after being shot dead by Taylor, the commander of British troops. The hole left in his neck by the bullet was never filled. After his death, with a chain around his neck and his body smeared with ash, and holding an iron pan with fish motifs carved on it, he perched on the fig tree on the northern side of the Katlahar Lake. Ever since then, he became the sunlight during the day and spread himself all over the lake and reigned over the lake all night from the fig tree. Tamiza's father waved his arms to get rid of the clouds in the sky in the hope of catching a glimpse of Munshi, which was all very well, but 2 or 2.25 years from now, or maybe 2.5, or even 3, after drowning to death in the quicksand in one corner of the bank recently sprung from the receding waters of the lake, where would Tamiza's father surface? Who was going to make room for him? The large jackfruit trees had long been cleared out by the fangs of the big flood, and once Sharafat Mondol's son had set up his brick kiln, the remaining trees would also be swallowed by the kiln. What would happen then? Where would Tamiza's father float up? The lake dried up rapidly. The dry land was cultivated, and people built their homes along the perimeter of the land. Would there be room for a large tree any more? Oh my God! I love that so much! Just as much the second time. So, A.H. Tammsaare, Vargamäe. It's a anthology. The publisher is Vagabond Voices. I'll put the link in the show notes, and I think they publish pretty much exclusively Estonian literature and translation. Tammsaare was born Anton Hansen in 1878 into a poor farming family, and that is the cast of characters that I met, and I don't mean his family, but a family like that I met in the opening chapter. He became a law student, but he was unable to take the bar, or whatever the bar would be called in Estonia, in 1911 because he had TB. So he worked on his brother's farm and then started writing, I think maybe after his marriage, and is one of the central writers in Estonian literature. Died in 1940. I just feel a vibration when I hold this book because of how fabulous that opening chapter was. Lindy and I both come from farming backgrounds. Lindy probably would enjoy living on a farm. I don't think that's the life for me. I certainly didn't feel that way as a kid, and perhaps because of that, I get so much out of farm novels. Where am I going to find time to read all these tomes? But this one, wow. I think I gave you the title wrong because I didn't notice it in the small print. The title is actually In Search of Almighty Voice by Bill Waiser. Bill Waiser was the head of the history department when I did my undergrad in history in the mid-'80s. I didn't take a class from him, but I knew who he was, and I think he might have known who I was. And he's retired now, and he's writing a lot of Saskatchewan history with particular emphasis on the Indigenous experience. One of the books that I've read by him, and I didn't think the writing was all that good, don't tell Professor Waiser, was written, co-authored with an Indigenous historian, Blair Stonechild. This is his latest, or penultimate latest, and it is about a member of the One Arrow Willow Cree, which was a tribe in what is now Saskatchewan. And in 1897, when this was known as the Northwest Territories, he was shot by the forerunner of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. It was the Northwest Mounted Police. And there has been controversy over the justifiability of his death and the circumstances of his death ever since. And this is what Bill Waiser has written this book about. And he says that understanding why he, Almighty Voice, mattered has a direct bearing on reconciliation today. So it just sounds right up my street. And this one, I think there's something queer about it, but I've forgotten what I heard about it that made me order it. And then every time I've talked about it, my confusion and curiosity both have deepened. It's The Stromness Dinner by Peter Benson. And I think, I know I read the first chapter or the first 10 pages to Lindy, and we were both quite taken with it. The confusion is that the publisher, Sarin, is a Welsh publisher, and the author is not Welsh. He's English, and the story, much of it happens on the island of Orkney, which isn't it off the coast of Scotland. So it's like, what is this novel? But boy, the first chapter about a group of renovators that have been hired to do some work on a house in Orkney. And the story goes from there, and I don't know where the story goes from there, but I think I might have read the first couple chapters to Lindy, and we both didn't really want to quit, so I have to get to this one. I think there's something queer about it too, but do you know? Don't tell me what happens, but is that right? It seems to me that's why I bought it in the first place. And finally, this is one of my other deep interests in reading, women's fiction in the first half of the 20th century. And this was just recently reissued. Marjorie Grant's Latchkey Ladies by Handheld Press, one of their classics series. And Marjorie Grant was a Canadian writer. My dear friend Leah from Calgary, I think, was the one that brought it to my attention. And I actually found a copy of this at Kinokuniya Books in Tokyo. Why they had it, I don't know. They don't have any other kind of books like that. But they had this one, so I snatched it up. So Marjorie Grant was a Canadian novelist and reviewer, and she was a close friend of Rose Macaulay, the British writer. And Rose Macaulay was the illicit lover of the only other book I've read from Handheld Press. Is the title on here? Vocations by Gerald O'Donovan. Gerald O'Donovan was an Irish priest who quit the priesthood, and then he and Rose Macaulay were lovers. And now Rose Macaulay was a friend of this Canadian writer, Marjorie Grant. Do you have to sleep with or know Rose Macaulay to get published by this press? Anyway, this is about working women in the UK during the era of the First World War. Originally published in 1921. Opening paragraph. What the serpent really tempted Eve with, Anne Carey said gloomily, was a latchkey. She had been too tired to eat the boiled beef, with plentiful greens, that the Mimosa Club provided for members on Thursday nights. But by the time the hot burnt coffee was handed round, and she had taken the large cup that Dolly, the fat-cheeked maid, had remembered to bring her, large cup a penny extra, she began to emerge from the physical languor that had kept her silent, and a faint color came into her face. I don't know about you, but that grabs me. Let's have a closer look at that cover image, shall we? All right, so in a way I do feel a little bit sheepish now that I've been, what are we getting up to? Close to 2 months in Saskatoon, living in Saskatoon, and I brought these books because I couldn't be without them. And I didn't want to wait for them to come in boxes or in the big shipment from Japan. But a lot of those books have already arrived and I haven't read a one of these. But, you know, sue me. This is my video. Thanks for watching.